It has been confirmed that rabbit hemorrhagic disease is causing widespread mortalities of wild hares and domestic rabbits in the Western and Northern Cape provinces. Bonnie Schumann of the Endangered Wildlife Trust gives some recommendations on this outbreak in today's episode of Plaas TV. But first, over to Lisa with the latest agricultural news.
Elanco, we are driven by our vision of food and companionship enriching life.
Welcome to today's news. The Agricultural Research Council recently signed a Memorandum of Understanding with the Botswana University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. The signing took place at the ARC's head office in Pretoria. The MOU aims to promote cooperation between the two institutions, including sharing expertise in the field of agricultural innovation. The agreement formalizes many years of existing collaboration in various areas of skills development and research projects. And South Africa's deciduous fruit season has kicked off with the Cape Town container terminal exceeding weekly volumes by 32% for 2 consecutive weeks. The first few vessels have been carrying exports destined for Europe and the United Kingdom. The season's fruit include table grapes, pomegranates, stone fruits and berries. Continued engagement took place between the fruit industry and the terminal, as volumes were estimated to increase by 5% year on year. According to the National Agricultural Marketing Council smallholder market access estimates for September, potatoes continue to be the most traded agricultural product in the fresh produce market system in South Africa. The South African National Fresh Produce Market's total mass traded in September was 282,956 million tonnes. This is 11% more than the previous year. The demand for fresh produce in the country continues to grow along with its population growth. And that's today's news. The Department of Agriculture, Land Reform and Rural Development recently announced the outbreak of the rabbit hemorrhagic disease in the Western and Northern Cape provinces. Bonnie Schumann from the Endangered Wildlife Trust joins us now. Bonnie, thank you very much for joining us. Exactly what is rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus?
Okay, so thank you for the opportunity to chat. Rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus is a virus that affects just rabbits, all species of rabbits, wild and domestic rabbits. And it's a virus that actually originated in China in 1984, and it's spread quite widely across the world since then. And now also has arrived in South Africa, and it is affecting, we have records of our wild hare species, red rock rabbits, as well as domestic rabbits at this stage.
Is there a history of this virus in South Africa?
No, this is the first time that it's actually arrived in South Africa. It has not been here before, but it's the first time that it's arrived here.
Where are cases confirmed that you are aware of?
Sure. So the cases that have been confirmed are quite widespread. We've had initial reports in the Sutherland and Middle Coast area. That's where we got the first reports from farmers last month. And since then, it's spread as far afield as Springbok. To the east towards Graafrenet, we've got reports from the Richmond area, Carnarvon, Calvinia, and it's also been reported as of about a week ago in the Western Cape, down in the Laingsburg, Toastrivier area. So it's spreading quite rapidly, and we are getting reports from quite far afield. And we're getting reports from people with domestic rabbits, as well as from farmers reporting wild hare deaths.
I gather it is very contagious.
Yeah, so yes, it's very, very contagious, and it spreads very easily. Sure, a very difficult thing to manage because it's spread by a lot of different ways. So it's likely that, for instance, flies, crows, it can spread through feed. So containing it is exceptionally difficult. Quarantining domestic rabbits is very difficult because it does spread very easily. And the virus is very hardy, very resistant. So once it's outside its host, it can actually survive extremely high temperatures, up to 50 degrees. And also it can actually survive freezing. And it probably persists outside of the host for about 3 months.
Is it dangerous for us? Is it a zoonotic disease?
So no, it has not. It's only affects the lagomorphs, so all the hare and rabbit species. It doesn't affect any other species. It's not zoonotic, so it can't affect humans at all. And it can't affect, for instance, people are quite worried about their pet dogs and their cats and so on. It can't affect them either. It's only the rabbit and hare species that are affected. And worldwide, in all the other countries where it's occurred, and in South Africa at this stage, that is the case.
Stay tuned. When we come back, I'll continue my discussion with Bonnie Schumann about the rabbit hemorrhagic disease.
Syngenta, bringing plant potential to life.
Goeiedag. Kommoditeitspryse het redelik gedaal op die termynmark vir lewering in Maart 2023 die afgelope week. Wit en geel mielies het onderskeidelik met 3.3 en 5.2% gedaal week op week, terwyl die koringprys 6.6% afgeneem het. Sonneblomse prys het ook 2.3% gedaal, terwyl sojabone 4% goedkoper geword het. Week op week het die prys van 'n vaatjie Brent 3 olie met 1.1% gedaal en is nou weer onder die $94 per vat, terwyl die rand redelik veld gewen het teenoor die dollar 5.4% versterk het en dis grootliks as gevolg van laer as verwagte Amerikaanse inflasie, wat dan gaan veroorsaak dat Amerika nie hulle rentekoerse so skerp verder verhoog nie en dus die rand laat versterk het. Die rand het dan ook met 0.5% versterk teenoor die pond en met 0.2% versterk teenoor die euro.
Welcome back to our discussion with Bonnie Schumann from the Endangered Wildlife Trust. Bonnie, why are you, the EWT, so concerned?
Sure. So we, as the Endangered Wildlife Trust, have been working for a number of years on the conservation of the critically endangered riverine rabbit. And the riverine rabbit is a species that occurs in the Nama Karoo along the seasonal rivers, but it also occurs down in the succulent Karoo, primarily in the Klein Karoo, across the veld, not just in the riparian areas, but more widely across the habitat. The problem is it's a very large area, but there are very few rabbits left, and where they occur, most of them are in small pockets. So they're quite isolated due to fragmentation of the habitat. So there's been a lot of transformation through ploughing and so on. So what we sit with is rabbits over a wide area, but in small populations. And we're very concerned because the mortality rate of this virus is around about 80%. So if you have a small population that gets hit hard by the virus, we're very concerned that the numbers remaining, will they be genetically viable in the long term? So that's our greatest concern.
What are the visible signs that our landowners should look out for?
So the first thing that's going to happen is farmers, what they started to see is dead hares on the farm. And the hares are in, the vegetation is not very dense, so they spotted them quite easily. Also, the hares on the farms tend to come to the lucerne lands. So one of the places the farmers first noted trouble was around the lucerne lands. They started to see a number of dead hares lying there, which is very unusual. The farmers said they've not seen deaths among the wild hares at this scale anywhere in the past. So what you'll see is not just one, but you'll start to notice a number of dead hares on the property. And that's the first sign of trouble. And scrub hares and cape hares are affected. And then we have had some reports from farmers as well, reporting dead red rock rabbits. They're more difficult to get reports on because farmers you have to specifically go look in the koppies and in amongst the rocks to actually find them. So I think they've been quite underreported at this stage. That's also our concern with the riverine rabbit because they're in very dense vegetation. So unless people actually specifically go look to see, is there a problem in those areas? It's possible that they haven't been reported yet because it just hasn't been seen.
Bonnie, tell us more about the disease. What happens to the animal?
Okay, so a rabbit hemorrhagic disease virus affects primarily the liver, and it causes a lot of damage and necrosis in the liver, and the other organs that are affected are the spleen and the lungs as well. It causes a lot of clotting and so on. And it's a virus that acts very rapidly. So once a rabbit's infected, it takes between 1 to 3 days before it actually will show signs. And people talk, especially the owners of domestic rabbits, talk about sudden death. So the rabbit appears fine, then it sort of stops eating, it might have a little bit of a fever, and then it suddenly dies. And from the time that it first stops eating or looks like it's a little bit unwell, to when it dies can be within a couple of hours, 5 or 6 hours or a day.
I'm sure there are many rabbit owners very concerned now. What are your recommendations?
So we've spoken to a number of vets, veterinarians, and we would suggest that rabbit owners speak to their local veterinarian to get advice firsthand from the veterinarians. Please, please, please do that, because it is going to be very important to quarantine your domestic rabbits. And not everybody is familiar with the sort of biocontrol of actually managing a virus like this. So it's going to be very important that your rabbits firstly do not have any contact with other rabbits. And remember, if friends of yours have got rabbits and you go visiting and you cuddle their rabbits and then you come home, you're essentially creating a direct link between those rabbits and your rabbits. So people with pet rabbits must be very careful to keep their rabbits isolated and quarantined. You can even do things like disinfecting your feet when you come home, wash your hands and so on before handling your pet rabbits. And then also even pay attention to where your feed is coming from. So if, for instance, especially people on farms who have pet rabbits, if you're cutting feed outside on the lucerne lands where rabbits have died, you don't want to do that. So pay attention to things like that. But please, we're urging pet owners to speak to their veterinarian. You can use bleach as a disinfectant. It's really good. But there are other products that the vets can maybe help with. So we are really urging rabbit owners to talk to their veterinarians. And then from the farmers' side, if they see carcasses in the veld, please, 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 if they could report those sightings to the Endangered Wildlife Trust, and I can give you our email address in a little bit. But if they report those sightings to the Endangered Wildlife Trust, we are working as an organization quite closely with the Department of Agriculture, the veterinary sector, as well as with the Departments of Conservation, Cape Nature, and then the Northern Cape Department of Conservation. We're working quite closely to at least try and monitor this outbreak. And what we're also looking at doing is getting samples from the different regions up to Onderstepoort, so that they can be properly tested, so we can verify exactly where this virus is occurring. And so we're mapping the extent of it across South Africa to really see where it is, what the impact it's having, and so on. This baseline will be quite important, because going forward, we will then be starting to look at recovery of these lagomorph populations. So are we starting to see live hares coming back into the habitats in a couple of months' time? So that's going to be very important.
So it is a state-controlled disease?
Absolutely, yes. So it must be reported. So the state veterinary sector has been quite active in, if we get farmers who report to us, then we put them in touch with their state veterinarian, and they can also, obviously most farmers know who their state veterinarians or vet technicians are. So they can contact them directly, because they will know if we need to get samples from their particular area up to Onderstepoort as well. So twofold, if they can contact the Endangered Wildlife Trust, as well as the state veterinarian in the area, we would really appreciate that.
Are there vaccines available?
So yes, there are vaccines available for this virus, and it's also important to know there are 2 strains of the virus. So initially it was RDV1, which primarily affected domestic rabbits. Subsequently, RDV2 has been recorded in a number of countries, and it affects both domestic and both wild. At the moment, Onderstepoort is typing the virus. They're working really hard to try and figure out which one of the 2 it is. It's likely that it's RDV2, because it is affecting domestic and wild rabbits. They need to type the virus, because the vaccine that will be imported will need to be virus specific for that specific strain. And then, so the vaccine is effective against the virus, but because it's novel, it's the first time it's occurring in South Africa, we don't have the vaccine in the country. So it's going to take a couple of months to get the paperwork in place to actually import the vaccine. And then it's going to have value to people who own pet rabbits and the domestic rabbit breeding industry. Ideally, hopefully, when it comes in, it's affordable because it could be potentially very expensive. But then at least one could look at vaccinating domestic rabbits and curtailing the virus sort of reservoir in the domestic rabbit populations, because they quite often have contact with the wild rabbits. So if we can get the domestic rabbit populations vaccinated, at least that reservoir is not available to the virus. At this stage, we're not going to be able to use a vaccine on wild hares and rabbits because you obviously have to catch the animal to give them the vaccine. And at this stage, that's not really practical. But we are working closely, as I said, with the agriculture and the conservation sectors to really look at what are the options going forward. What do we need to get in place? Where is the vaccine research at this stage in terms of down the line potentially being able to help the wild species as well to develop immunity? It's also important to mention at this stage is that what happens is the virus will pull through the populations, but some animals will survive. So those that do survive build up immunity, and so the number of animals with immunity increases over time. In most countries where RHCV has arrived, it's there to stay. So this isn't something that's going to happen now and then it's gone, it's here to stay. So whatever we do now, we're planning for the long term, because this virus will have stages where there's outbreaks, and then it will become quiet again, and then there will be outbreaks again. So whatever we're doing now, our planning is looking at the long term, is how do we, down the line, what all can we do to curb those outbreaks when they happen and try and get the immunity of the local populations built up if at all possible. And certainly in the domestic rabbits, the vaccination is going to be critical. There's a lot of people making a living from breeding domestic rabbits in the pet trade and so on. And really they're going to be pretty hard hit. So it's critical that the vaccine comes in and that it's going to be affordable.
Bonnie, thank you very much. You did mention that we should contact our nearest vet or state vet, but you are also willing to help?
Yeah, so the email address is a good one because I'm quite often out of signal. So ewt@ewt.org.za. And then, so email is going to be the best way to reach us, because that will get me, I will get your email at some point, even if I'm out of phone signal.
Good advice from Bonnie Schumann, and she is from the Endangered Wildlife Trust.
BKB, die betroubare tuiste van landbou. BKB, the trusted home of agriculture. Standard Bank. It can be.